Hi, Caroline.
Hi.
Thanks so much for taking the time to meet with me to record this conversation for the Deep Seed podcast. Really appreciate it.
Absolute pleasure.
So we're going to be talking about Kelp Blue in this conversation, the company. And to make sure that everyone's on board right from the start, could you maybe explain what the company is about?
So Kelp Blue, what we do is we cultivate giant kelp, which is Macrocystis porifera. We only focus on one species, and it's the largest seaweed on the planet. And we do that in very cold, clear waters. Our first location is in Namibia. And we also have a farm in New Zealand, and we've just received license in Alaska. We cultivate giant kelp because it's really great at being an ecosystem engineer. And what that means is kelp has the ability to create ecosystems because it supports an enormous amount of life. Think of it as a forest. And in forest, you have a lot of living creatures that take shelter, that feed in the forest, that build their homes. That's why we're doing it, is to create new marine ecosystems, but also to sequester carbon, because kelp is fantastic at sequestering carbon. But not only that, that's what we do in the ocean. It's also, with what we're doing, we are also creating sustainable jobs in communities that need ongoing sustainable jobs. We harvest only the top 20% of the kelp, so the canopy. And from that, we create our biostimulants that we then give to farmers so they can increase their yield, increase soil health, and generally make sure that the food system is a lot more resilient.
Maybe you could already give us the overview of how do you grow kelp?
Well, we have what's called a hatchery. So we have a very cold room in Namibia where we keep our little baby kelp dormant so it doesn't grow. We have to create more of these little kelp babies, and then what happens is we put a twine, so essentially string, in a bottle wrapped around a tube. We put that where all the baby kelp is. Kelp loves to latch onto something, and when it finds something that it can latch onto, it immediately latches on and it starts growing. So we make sure that on that twine, those baby kelps attach to that twine. That twine is what we then take out into the ocean and put on the structures. And from that little baby kelp, a large kelp plant grows. And that's what we do. Every single week, we are bulking up our baby kelp. We are outplanting it into the ocean and watching it grow. So we have a consistent planting schedule, and we have a consistent harvesting schedule. Kelp takes around 7 months for it to be able to be harvested. So we make sure that our teams that plant the kelp out also monitor how the growth is, and then that growth monitoring goes to the harvesting team, and the harvesting teams knows where they can harvest and how much they can harvest. That goes to the factory.
Okay, yeah. And as far as I understand, there's 3 benefits to this whole process. The first one is carbon sequestration. Second one is marine ecosystem restoration. And the third one is harvesting the material, the source material, to create eco-positive products.
As well. And I would also say, though, there's another benefit, which is job creation, and also adding to the knowledge of the planet that on kelp. So it's really important that we continue to study what we call the ecosystem services of kelp, because yes, it's great at marine biodiversity, sequestering carbon, great product for agriculture, but I also think it's important that we understand that it's also great socially. It creates those jobs. It keeps money into the community, as well as it's the more we cultivate kelp, the more knowledge there will be. And the more knowledge that we have on kelp, the more people will be interested in it, and the more people will start farming it.
So the first part I mentioned was the carbon sequestration part, and I'd like to know how that works.
So kelp, how it grows very quickly. And in optimal conditions, it can grow 60 centimeters a day. What also happens is kelp naturally releases what's called dissolved organic carbon and then particulate organic carbon. So pieces of the seaweed break off, and that gets carried out into the ocean. That is, when we say that seaweed and kelp sequester carbon, that is what we mean. So seaweed grows quite quickly. It has a lot of carbon stored in its biomass. The biomass that gets released and carried out to the ocean and then sinks, that is what we're studying for carbon sequestration. So a naturally occurring process is what we're trying to prove.
And are you able to sort of quantify today how much carbon is sequestered thanks to the growing of kelp, thanks to your activities?
Theoretically, yes. So we've used a model that was developed, and that theoretically, that is what we are proving. So between 2 and 11% of the net primary production, so that's the carbon that is taken into the plant, can be sequestered permanently, and that's what we're busy proving. We haven't proven it yet because the science and the data still needs to be there. But that is what we're doing with our Kelp Forest Foundation, is indeed proving those numbers.
Okay, and you need to be able to prove them to actually certify that carbon and then potentially sell it?
Potentially, but it'll still take a while.
Yeah, so that's not something you do yet.
No. We don't sell carbon credits. We don't have carbon. There is no carbon credit yet for seaweed for our seaweed.
Okay, and in terms of marine ecosystem restoration, how does that work? I mean, you spoke about it a little bit earlier, but maybe you can tell me some more.
Yeah. So imagine, when you walk in an open field and the wind is blowing, it's really windy. But then when you go into a forest, what the forest does is it helps break the wind. So if it's very stormy outside, you're going to go into a forest to look for shelter. It's the same thing that happens in the water. So if you have really tiny fish, like the nursery fish, they'll go to the kelp forest because it is a lot calmer there. It also provides protection for predators because you can hide amongst the leaves. So it is, like I said at the beginning, it's an ecosystem engineer, so it supports an enormous amount of life. And just imagine if you have one type of fish that goes into the middle of the kelp, maybe it brings in another fish because they're a predator. What's really very interesting is we plant our kelp on structures, and what we had was we just had blocks. And we thought, well, we're missing a trick here. We want more marine life to come. So instead of creating a block, we created layers in this anchor. And think of it, there's a gap between the layers. And we thought that would be a very good place for crayfish to hide, and was very encouraging. Is that we created these blocks, we dropped them in the water, and then the 2 days after, we already had our first crayfish taking up residency. So it's we have our crayfish hotels going in Luderitz, which is great because they hide from seals. So the seals can't get into the gaps. So they are protected from predators because those crayfish are quite tasty for seals.
I heard that seals were a keystone species. Is that right?
The keystone species is in one that is you're able to monitor the health of what the entire marine pyramid is. They're a keystone, but there's also penguins, which are quite important. Or we also like to make a differentiation between keystone species and the charismatic species. So the ones that we track because they are very charismatic. And what's important is to prove that the forest is indeed an ecosystem engineer. If you pay attention to the charismatic species, you get a lot more attention.
What's an example of a charismatic species?
Well, I think penguins are quite charismatic.
Sure.
But the dolphins, I have to say, in terms of charisma, the dolphins are also very charismatic. And the other day we had almost a superpod swimming around the forest. And then our divers and our marine monitoring team were just giggling, and you can hear them on the GoPro giggling underwater because it's just such a delight to be in the water with dolphins.
Incredible, yeah. So you're monitoring all of that biodiversity?
Yes.
So what is it? How do you do that? We
have divers that do that, but we also work together with a company called Nature Metrics. And what they do is, we collect the environmental DNA. And environmental DNA is eDNA. Any organism that leaves any kind of bit of, a fish that leaves a gill behind, or anything that it comes off of an animal. What we do is we take a bucket of water, we put it through a filter. That filter then gets sent to the lab, and any DNA that has been left in the water gets picked up, and we run it through the gene sequencer, and then we can exactly pinpoint what species and what fish or mammal has been in the area. And that allows us to very quickly and accurately track how much has been attracted to the kelp forest.
That's incredible. I didn't know you could do that. And have you seen some significant results so far in the kelp forest you've grown?
Well, given the fact that there was no forest before, and we had maybe 6 or 7 species, and now we have counted almost, over 500, I think that's a pretty significant increase in marine biodiversity.
That's amazing, yes. So after you planted the kelp, it takes 7 months, you said, to be
full grown, just about.
Ready to harvest, but you only cut the top 20% of it.
Yes.
Why is that?
Because we need to leave the rest of the biomass in the water to support that ecosystem that we're trying to create. So think of it, so it grows up, and then when it reaches the surface, it'll continue to grow, and that means it floats on top of the water. So it creates a canopy. And it is that canopy that we trim. So think of it, we basically mow the lawn. So when you mow the lawn, you only cut the top of the grass, and the rest of the grass stays there because you want it to be beautiful and green. We do the same thing on the ocean. We only take the top off, and the rest of it stays in the water to still remain and be that ecosystem for all of the species that have taken up residency.
Okay, but tell me if I'm wrong, but I seem to understand that once you cut the 20% off, the rest of the kelp dies.
And then it regrows.
And it regrows.
Yes.
But first, it kind of dies back completely and then regrows from the structure?
Well, what it does is it sends a signal down to the bottom, to the holdfast, to start growing more. So then at the same time, you have a lot growing as well. So it grows very quickly. So we've done now tests on how quickly it regrows. And it's been fantastic. So we figure that we can harvest 150 tons from 1 hectare of kelp per year with multiple harvests.
Okay, yeah. And so after you've harvested that kelp, what do you do with it?
We take it to the factory. So we have a factory in Namibia, and we put it through our machinery, and which is purely mechanical. And what we do is we chop it up very small. We put it under pressure to burst the cell walls because of all the bioactives are in those cell walls. Then we put it through a filtration system. So then we have the liquid, which then goes to the farmers. And then we have the pulp, which is what we make our leathers from. We extract alginate, and that's what we use. We're further researching how we can extract the valuable components that can be used in nutraceuticals, in pharmaceuticals, in many other applications. Yes.
And at the moment, is there anything that is marketed? Any products that you're selling from there?
We have a biomaterial, so it's like a leather, but I don't say it's a leather because it's not from an animal. That is something that we're developing right now, and we are doing tests to make sure that it holds up to all of the stresses that bio leather needs to hold up to, and that's progressing very well. We also extract something called an alginate, and an alginate is a thickening agent that can be used in a lot of other many products. So think of it that can be used in wound dressing. Think it can be used in to coat. Because it gels and it's a really good coating. So we're understanding how we extract that and then developing those markets as well.
Okay. So, and the flagship product is the biostimulants.
Definitely.
Then that's from the liquid,
yes,
not
that's
the pulp.
The liquid. That's from the liquid.
We'll dive a little bit deeper into the detail and the science later with Valentin, but maybe you could give us an overview of how that works.
Well, coastal communities have known for thousands of years what the benefits are of seaweed on their gardens. So you have a lot of what you collect beach cast, and if you put it on your garden, and you have an amazing garden and amazing crops. We're essentially doing that. We're creating that superfood for crops from our kelp. So what it does is it increases soil health, it increases yields. It's particularly good in drought stress or in places where there is excessive heat. So what it does, and it might sound indeed a little bit technical, but it helps plants survive abiotic stress. So not animal or diseases, but climatic stress or anything that is not natural stress.
Okay. What do you hope to achieve with Kelp Blue? Or let me ask the question a little bit differently. If we travel to the future, we're in 2040, in 15 years' time, more or less, and you look back and think this was a success, what does it look like?
It looks like increasing the livelihoods for farmers. They're under an incredible amount of pressure now, not only because of climate, but also the amount of fertilizers that are being used. And the conventional farming system does need to change, and certainly the regulatory pressure. So I think success would be having farmers understand that there are very natural ways that can be used to help increase their yield and to restore soil health. I think that's what it would be for me.
You mentioned all of these other ecosystemic services that you're providing in terms of biodiversity, carbon sequestration. All of that is not really being rewarded yet, but is that something that you hope will be rewarded in the future? Does that feature somewhere in your business plan for the future?
Well, I think we are already being rewarded for it. It doesn't have to be a monetary reward. I mean, the reward is that we're restoring health back to the ocean. The reward is that we are sequestering CO2. We don't need to be, it would be nice, but I think we would do ourselves a disservice to only think in terms of money, and that is being the reward. I think for us, what's really important is how we measure ourselves. And what we do every quarter is we measure ourselves on 4 types of returns. Number 1 is inspiration. So what's our return on inspiration? How much we can inspire people to do differently. Because we are doing things differently, we think differently, we behave differently. So how much we can inspire others to be the same. Business is a force for good. Our second return is our return on social capital. So how many jobs we can create in the local communities, how much money we can keep in local communities. So everywhere where we have a forest, we have a factory. And everywhere where we have factory, we have sales. Also return on natural capital. So how much we can restore planetary health. And those are all metrics that we measure ourselves. And this is something that we hold ourselves to account. And then lastly, of course, there's the return on financial. And that is indeed how much money we produce, because we have to be profitable if we are then to continue getting return on inspiration, social, and natural capital. And this is a model we've taken from common land. And we've made it our own, and it's something that is in our blood. It's in our DNA. It also shapes how we make decisions and how we make our own investment decisions.
And that contributes to keeping the teams motivated. Also, feeling like what they're doing has true purpose and is making a difference in the world.
Yes, and we do every quarter we publish what we call our 4R report, and then when we have our team meetings, we celebrate the successes, but we also celebrate our oops moments, because in the end, when you talk about what the purpose is, people do things for many different reasons. Some of the team is very motivated by, indeed, marine biodiversity. Other part of the team is very motivated by the types of jobs we can create, because we also spend a lot of money on training. Other parts of the team, I personally think the marine biodiversity is, the biggest driver. Also the return on inspiration, because I firmly believe that we work we work because we want to contribute something. And contributing something to the health of the planet, and then having a purpose like Kelp Blue it definitely is truly inspirational. So the return on inspiration also is something that drives me a lot.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned you started in Namibia. Why Namibia specifically?
The Benguela current. So it is an incredibly nutritious current. And we're also on a local upwelling. The water is very clean, nutritious. The light is perfect. The people are amazing. Namibia is very supportive. It was an all-around winner.
Okay. Did you have any connection to Namibia before, or did you just come in with the idea of starting to grow kelp there because you identified the country as being ideal?
There are a couple of countries around the world, or the coastlines, where the kelp grows. So we first mapped that, and then it was a question of traveling to those countries to see where would be easiest. Daniel did that, so he went to Namibia. He had a very good experience there, and then was going to go travel to the other countries where kelp also grows and what was a possibility. But then lockdown happened. So because that was the only place that we traveled to, or he traveled to, and we needed to start it naturally became Namibia, which was by all means the best choice ever.
So there's only like specific locations that have the right conditions to grow that kelp.
Correct.
What is the room for scaling this as a global solution?
Oh, there's plenty of room. I mean, the ocean is 70% of the planet. So there's a lot of room. But of course, I mean, being realistic, you probably can't grow kelp in the really deep waters. But on the continental shelf, there's plenty of room to grow.
Okay. How many hectares are you doing at the moment?
Right now, we have 30 in the water, and we have license for 6,000 in Namibia.
Wow. Okay. Huge scaling.
It has
ahead.
the potential to be very big.
How big could it be? Like if dream like scenario, 15 years from now, how big could Kelp Blue be, or the whole kelp industry?
Well, I hope that Kelp Blue is not the only cultivator at scale of kelp. I would encourage more people to think big and then plant kelp, because there is just a humongous potential.
Is there anything that is slowing down that progress at the moment? Are there any hurdles that need to be removed in order for that scaling to happen faster?
I think so every country has different laws and different regulations for getting a license. There is no harmonization at all. So it really is a country-by-country endeavor. That makes it quite challenging, because you really need to understand the laws and the permitting process, and a lot of time goes into that. So I think the people who are doing this right now around the world really truly are the pioneers and should very much be commended. But there always has to be a pioneer doing these things, and from the pioneers, it makes the whole process easier. So I do expect that in 5 or 10 years, the process will be a lot easier around the world.
Mm-hmm. And as the sort of carbon and biodiversity credits come in as well, will that create an extra incentive for people to invest in that space?
Yes, I think so. Yes,
it should.
Yeah,
it makes sense, right? Yeah. What would you say was the biggest challenge you've encountered in the Kelp Blue story so far?
Interesting question, because that is how you fundamentally define the word challenge. And a challenge, I mean, what is a challenge? It's something that is an interesting problem to overcome.
Yeah.
And interesting problems to overcome are always, how do you build, how do you keep scaling, and how do you make sure that you don't lose sight of who you are fundamentally while you continue to grow?
Okay. That's been tough sometimes?
It hasn't been tough, but it's always been something that has grounded and centered us. So if we always go back to the 4 R's and the reasons why we are doing things, then the decisions generally make themselves.
To close this conversation, I'd like to know, what's the one key message that you'd like people to leave us with today?
I think the key message is that it is possible to have massive positive impact on planet and people while also still being profitable. And then, can I say one more thing?
Of course, yes.
Well, not a key message, but what I would encourage people to do is to look into seaweed, talk about seaweed, figure out where you might want to go into seaweed, because it really is an amazing input. And we need more people getting into seaweed.
The message is out there. Thanks a lot for being a pioneer in that space. And I hope that this conversation can maybe spark some new passions and interests from people.
I hope so. Thank you very much.
Thank you.